Hello, everyone. I am Hannah. I am a 32, and my younger brother Caleb is 29. We grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where people would stop you at the grocery store just to tell you they saw your dad fixing someone's truck or your mom at the school front desk. My parents, Mark and Linda, had us young, barely out of their own teenage years. They were hardworking, simple people who loved us, but also leaned heavily on me from a very early age. My dad worked as a mechanic, often coming home covered in grease and smelling of motor oil, while my mom spent long hours behind the front desk at the elementary school, juggling the schedules of teachers and parents while battling chronic joint pain that started in her 40s. From the time I was old enough to babysit, I was considered the reliable one. I was the girl neighbors called when they needed someone to watch their kids, the one who was trusted with errands, with helping mom balance bills, with making sure dinner was ready when dad had to work late. Caleb was the golden boy. He was the kid who could flash a charming smile and talk his way out of anything. Teachers loved him, friends wanted to be around him, and even when he got in trouble, my parents brushed it off. I vividly remember being grounded for a week because I missed a curfew by 15 minutes in high school, while Caleb once came home at 3 in the morning after sneaking out, and Mom just sighed and said, "Boys will be boys." He was their baby, and I was the dependable daughter who was expected to handle everything. When I graduated college, I planned to move out right away, but life had other plans. My dad had back surgery after years of physical labor wrecked his spine, and my mom was newly diagnosed with early-stage arthritis. They needed help, and it felt wrong to leave. So I moved back home and picked up every responsibility I could. For almost 3 years, I worked full-time as a medical billing specialist, paid most of the household bills, kept the fridge stocked, and quietly handed Mom cash when her medication was not fully covered by insurance. During a rough period when Dad could not work at all, I even helped cover the mortgage. My friends were out traveling, moving into apartments, starting their lives, while I spent my mid-20s doing grocery runs and refinancing bills. I do not resent helping them, but it shaped everything. I became the caretaker by default. Eventually, I managed to save up enough to get my own place. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati, but it was mine. I remember the day I moved in. I painted the walls soft colors, filled the living room with plants, and scavenged thrift stores for furniture I could refinish myself. It was my safe space, a place where I could finally breathe and feel like an adult. I loved my quiet evenings, my little balcony where I drank tea after work, and my office where I could read or work on side projects. That apartment felt like my reward for all the years of sacrifice. Then Caleb's life unraveled. He had been dating Emily, a sweet but overwhelmed woman who was clearly exhausted by Caleb's lack of direction. When she had their baby, Mason, everything came crashing down. Emily left him. She told him she could not handle his temper or his inability to keep a job for more than a few months. Caleb showed up at my apartment late one night, mascara streaked from crying, with Mason in his arms, a diaper bag slung over his shoulder, and desperation in his eyes. He said, "I just need a place for a while, Hannah. Please." I looked at my baby nephew, tiny and red-faced, and I could not say no. I moved my office into the corner of my bedroom and turned the second room into a nursery. I bought a crib with my savings, rearranged my furniture to make space for all of Mason's things, and told myself this was temporary. Caleb promised he would get a job and get back on his feet. I believed him. For a while, I even felt good about helping. Mason was a sweet baby, and I loved spending time with him. But weeks turned into months. Caleb would get jobs and quit them just as quickly. First, it was a gas station, then a warehouse job, then a delivery gig. Each time, he would have a reason why it didn't work out. Meanwhile, I was covering rent, utilities, groceries, and Mason's expenses. Diapers and formula alone cost a fortune, and I found myself picking up overtime shifts just to keep up. Caleb spent his days at home, claiming he was too tired to work while I came home from 12-hour days to clean bottles, do laundry, and soothe a crying baby. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. I had been up late the night before doing overtime paperwork, and I woke up to laughter in the living room. Caleb was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone, while our dad sat there holding Mason, making faces and laughing. There were fast food bags on the coffee table, and the smell of breakfast sandwiches hung in the air. I asked Caleb if he could help me with the electric bill since it was due that week, and he scoffed. "This is my apartment now. Stop acting like you own it." I froze. My apartment. The one I worked years to afford. Before I could respond, Dad chuckled and said, "He's just stressed, Hannah. Give him some slack." That stung deeper than I expected. I had sacrificed so much for this family, and here was my father, laughing it off, acting like Caleb was the one who needed sympathy. After that day, I started noticing a pattern I had been ignoring. Dad would bring over groceries, but only things Caleb liked. Mom would call, not to ask about me, but to check if Caleb was eating or if Mason had enough clothes. I was a background character in my own home. When I confronted Mom about it, she said, "He's struggling. You're the strong one." That was their excuse for everything. The final straw came a few weeks later. I walked in after a long day of work, exhausted, ready to collapse, and saw a brand new gaming console hooked up to my TV. Caleb was playing a new game, headphones on, Mason in a bouncer nearby. I was stunned. I asked him how he could afford that, and he shrugged and said, "I used Mason's child support. Emily sends it every month." I felt rage boiling inside me. I had been covering rent and bills while he spent money meant for his son on a gaming system. That night, after Mason went to sleep, I told Caleb he had 60 days to move out. He laughed at first, then called me heartless. I reminded him that this was my apartment, my lease, my bills. He accused me of tearing the family apart. My father said I was being unfair and that Caleb needed time to heal. But I had reached my limit. For years, I had been the dependable one, the caretaker, the safety net. I had sacrificed my 20s, my savings, and now my peace of mind. I looked at Caleb, who was glaring at me from the couch like I was the villain in his story, and I realized I could not keep living like this. My family would never see it, but I was drowning. I loved Mason, but I refused to raise a child that was not mine while my brother sat idle and my parents enabled him. I had been used, manipulated, and guilt-tripped my entire life. I took a deep breath, told Caleb I meant what I said, and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. But I was done being used. 2 months later, Caleb still had not left. I had given him every chance, extended every deadline, and made it painfully clear that he needed to find his own place. Yet each day that passed made it more obvious that he had no intention of going anywhere. He treated my apartment like it was his own bachelor pad, leaving dirty dishes piled in the sink, tossing laundry wherever he pleased, and sleeping in while I dragged myself to work at dawn. What was worse was that Mason, an innocent baby who deserved love and attention, was often left crying in his crib, while Caleb lounged on the couch with his phone or disappeared for hours without explanation. The resentment built up like pressure in a sealed container. I would come home from work drained and be greeted not by the peace of my once safe space, but by chaos. Toys scattered on the floor, empty bottles half-rinsed on the counter, Caleb's shoes kicked into the hallway. And every time I confronted him, he brushed me off, saying it was temporary or that I was overreacting. But it was not temporary anymore. It was my life being consumed by his irresponsibility. The night that finally broke me started like any other. I worked overtime, came home late, and opened the door to the sound of laughter. Not Mason's laughter, but the rowdy voices of Caleb's friends. The living room smelled of beer, the coffee table was covered with empty cans, and Mason was wailing in his crib, ignored in the corner. My stomach twisted. That was it. I could not pretend anymore. I told Caleb I was done, that I was changing the locks. He smirked, unbothered, and said I would never kick out my own brother and his baby. Something inside me snapped. I walked into my room, closed the door, and called the police for a wellness check. It felt surreal to explain the situation, my voice shaking but steady enough to make them understand that Mason's well-being was at risk. When the officers arrived, the atmosphere shifted. Caleb tried to act calm, insisting everything was fine, but they saw the baby's tear-streaked face, the beer cans, the mess. They asked Caleb to leave for the night. He packed a bag with more anger than care, glaring at me as if I had betrayed him in the worst possible way. He stormed out, calling me a traitor as the door slammed behind him. For the first time in months, silence filled the apartment. I stood in the living room, exhausted but strangely light, and that night I had the first peaceful sleep I had known in far too long. The next morning, the weight of everything hit me. I knew Caleb would not let this go easily, and I knew Mason deserved better than this endless cycle. I decided to reach out to Emily. I sent her a message explaining what had been happening, and her response came quickly. She was shocked, furious, and heartbroken all at once. She told me she had no idea Caleb was spending the child support money on himself instead of Mason. When I told her about the gaming console and the receipts, she said she was going to file for full custody. She asked if I could help, and I did not hesitate. Together, we began to build a record of Caleb's neglect. I had photos of Mason left in his crib for hours while Caleb played video games or napped. I had receipts showing Caleb buying electronics while I covered diapers and formula. I had messages from him that made my stomach turn, bragging about how he was using the money Emily sent for Mason on things he called fun stuff. The custody hearing was a complete disaster for Caleb. I sat in that sterile courtroom, my hands trembling as I clutched the folder of evidence Emily and I had worked so hard to compile. Caleb walked in with the same cocky attitude he always carried, wearing a wrinkled shirt and acting like this was some minor inconvenience. He clearly thought he could charm his way out of this situation the way he always had. But charm could not erase screenshots of him bragging about using Mason's child support money on electronics. It could not make the photos of Mason sitting in a soiled diaper disappear, or the receipts showing me paying for everything while Caleb used Emily's money on himself. Emily spoke clearly and confidently about her concerns, her voice cracking only once when she described how she had left Mason with Caleb because she thought he would be safe, only to find out he had been treated like an afterthought. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a lump in my throat. I told the court everything, from the night Caleb showed up crying at my door with Mason in his arms, to the months of unpaid bills, to the day I called the police because Mason was crying alone in his crib while Caleb drank with friends. I watched Caleb's face harden with every word I spoke. He was furious, but I refused to look away. The judge listened intently, asking questions that Caleb could not answer without revealing just how irresponsible he had been. It was clear that his story, the one where he was a struggling single dad just doing his best, was unraveling quickly. When the ruling came, Caleb's face turned pale. Emily was awarded primary custody of Mason, and Caleb was ordered to attend parenting classes and pay child support. He looked stunned, as if he had genuinely believed the outcome would go in his favor. Emily cried tears of relief, while Caleb stormed out of the courtroom without a word to either of us. The fallout at home was immediate. My parents were livid. They called me a traitor, accused me of betraying Caleb, and claimed I had torn the family apart. They insisted Caleb just needed support, that I should have kept quiet and let them handle it. But their support was exactly why we had ended up here. They had enabled him for years, excusing his behavior while I carried responsibility after responsibility. For the first time in my life, I did not let their guilt-tripping sway me. I told them I would not apologize for protecting Mason and for refusing to let Caleb use me any longer. Their disappointment stung, but I felt a sense of relief that outweighed everything else. Once the hearing was over, I finally took back control of my life. I changed the locks on my apartment and de-cleaned every inch of it. It was exhausting, but therapeutic. I scrubbed the stains out of the carpets, donated the furniture Caleb had broken, and reorganized my office. It was as if I was reclaiming not just my space, but my sense of peace. For the first time in months, I could sit in my living room in silence and feel safe. There were no beer cans cluttering the counters, no video game noise coming from the TV, no tension hanging in the air. My home felt like mine again. Caleb, meanwhile, started couch surfing. He bounced between friends' apartments and stayed with a distant cousin for a while. Through small-town gossip and a few updates from my parents, I learned that he had sold his gaming console to cover rent 1 month. It was strange to hear about him struggling, but I felt no satisfaction in it. If anything, it was a grim reminder of the choices he had made. I hoped he would eventually learn something from this, but I no longer felt responsible for saving him. What surprised me most during all of this was Emily. I had not been close to her before. She was always just Caleb's girlfriend, then his ex. But when everything came out, she reached out to thank me. She told me she had been afraid to fight for custody because she thought Caleb's family would always take his side, and she was touched that I chose Mason's well-being over blind loyalty. We started talking more often, not just about Mason, but about life in general. Emily was kind, funny, and strong in a way I had not realized before. She invited me to Mason's first birthday party, and I did not hesitate to go. When I walked into Emily's house that day, the difference in Mason was striking. He looked healthy, well-fed, and happy. He was toddling around with a big grin, giggling as Emily guided him toward his little cake. The room was decorated with colorful balloons and streamers, and Mason was surrounded by people who clearly adored him. Watching him in that environment made me emotional in a way I had not expected. He was thriving. He was safe. He had everything a child deserves, and I felt a swell of pride knowing I had played a role in getting him there. I stood off to the side for a moment, taking it all in, and tears welled in my eyes as I watched him laugh. Seeing Mason happy and thriving with his mom made me cry. Fast forward another year, and life feels like it belongs entirely to me now. Caleb is still living with our parents, but the dynamic has changed drastically. The golden boy image he once had has completely crumbled. Mom and Dad went from defending him to whispering their frustrations behind closed doors. They've tried pushing him toward independence, but Caleb always has an excuse. He's had 5 different jobs in the past year, each lasting no longer than a month or 2. He claims every boss was out to get him, but even my parents have started to see the pattern. When I visit, the house feels heavy. Caleb spends most of his days in his old bedroom, curtains drawn, scrolling endlessly on his phone or playing games on a cheap secondhand console he bought with my parents' money. The tension is thick. Mom has this new nervous habit of constantly rearranging furniture and cleaning when I come over, as if she can scrub away her regret for how she treated me before. I don't rub it in her face, but I don't sugarcoat anything either. She once admitted, through tears, that she wished she'd stepped in years ago to stop Caleb's behavior, that she'd been blind to his manipulation because she wanted to believe he was just going through a rough patch. Hearing her say that was a strange mix of validation and sadness for me. I've been working hard, and it's paying off. My promotion last year wasn't the peak, it was just the beginning. I've moved up again at work, and now I'm leading my own small team. It feels surreal, especially when I think about the nights I stayed awake listening to Caleb yell at his ex, Emily, or storm around my apartment like he owned the place. That version of me, the one who tiptoed around him, who sacrificed her peace to avoid conflict, feels like a stranger. My condo savings turned into a down payment, and 6 months ago, I bought a cozy 2-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood. Walking through the door every day still feels like a small miracle. No one is crashing on my couch. No one is eating my groceries. No one is slamming doors or blaming me for their problems. It's just mine. Emily and I have become close friends. She's one of the strongest women I know, and seeing her rebuild her life has been inspiring. She's back in school, working toward a degree, and Mason is thriving. He's a bright, happy kid who runs straight into my arms whenever I see him. I've become auntie in every sense, and it fills me with a kind of joy I didn't realize I was missing. Emily has told me more than once that she doesn't know where she'd be if I hadn't stepped in when I did, and while I don't see myself as some hero, I do feel proud that I was able to help protect them. Caleb, on the other hand, refuses to take accountability. He blames Emily for everything, even now. He says the court system is rigged and that he doesn't get enough time with Mason because Emily poisoned him against his dad. The truth is, Caleb doesn't show up. He misses visitations, doesn't pay child support on time, and when he does see Mason, he tries to be the fun dad with no rules, which only stresses Emily out. I've stopped trying to mediate between them because it's not my job anymore. Caleb dug his own hole, and I finally learned to step back. My relationship has been another unexpected blessing. I started dating someone last year, And while I was nervous at first after everything I'd been through, he's been patient and supportive. He respects my boundaries and encourages me to keep growing. For the first time, I feel safe enough to talk about what happened with Caleb without feeling judged or like I'm overreacting. He's even met Emily and Mason, and the four of us have gone out together a few times. Watching Mason giggle as he plays with someone who actually cares about him, who isn't weighed down by resentment or anger, feels like a glimpse into the childhood I wish my brother could have given him. My parents have softened, though their guilt lingers. Dad, who used to roll his eyes whenever I complained about Caleb, now quietly slips Emily money to help with Mason's expenses. Mom has started going to therapy, something she swore she'd never do, and she's slowly realizing how much favoritism and enabling damaged both Caleb and me. I visit occasionally, but I've learned to keep my distance. My condo feels like my sanctuary, and I guard it fiercely. Last month, I hosted Mason's second birthday party at my place. Emily brought over cupcakes, balloons, and his favorite dinosaur toys. My boyfriend helped set up decorations while Mason ran around squealing with excitement. Caleb didn't come. He sent a text saying he was too tired from work, but I heard from my parents that he quit again the week before. Watching Mason blow out his candles surrounded by people who genuinely love him was bittersweet. It made me grateful for the boundaries I set, even when my family made me feel like the villain. Looking back, I see now that Caleb wasn't just freeloading in my apartment. He was draining me emotionally, mentally, and financially. It wasn't just about him living there. It was about how much of myself I gave up to keep the peace. Setting boundaries wasn't easy, and it came at the cost of my relationship with my parents for a while, but it was the best decision I've ever made. My life is peaceful now, and I finally feel like I'm living for myself. Emily and I joke sometimes that Mason is going to grow up thinking I'm some kind of superhero. I don't feel like one, but when I look at the life Emily has built, the confidence she's gained, and the way Mason lights up when he sees me, I know I did something right. We've both rebuilt our lives from the chaos Caleb left behind.